Kindly like and subscribe to watch the next episode. Aegon's Conquest. The Maesters of the Citadel, who keep the histories of Westeros, have used Aegon's Conquest as the touchstone for the past 300 years. Birth, deaths, battles, wars and other events are dated, either AC, after the conquest, or BC, before the conquest. True scholars had such dating far from precise. Aegon Targaryen's conquest of the Seven Kingdoms did not take place in a single day. More than 2 years passed between Aegon's landing and his Old Town coronation. And even then, the conquest remained incomplete, since Dorne remained unsubdued. Regular attempts to bring the Dornishmen into the realm continued all through King Aegon's reign and well into the reigns of his sons, making it impossible to fix a precise end date for the wars of conquest. Even the start date has been a matter of debate. Many assume wrongly that the reign of King Aegon the First Targaryen began on the day he landed at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, beneath the Three Hills, where the city of King's Landing would eventually stand. The day of Aegon's landing was celebrated by the king and his descendants, but the Conqueror actually dated the start of his reign from the day he was crowned and anointed in the starry sept of Old Town by the High Septon of the Faith. His coronation took place 2 years after Aegon's landing, after all 3 of the major battles of the Wars of Conquest had been fought and won. Most of Aegon's actual conquering took place from 2 to 1 BC, before the conquest. The Targaryens were of pure Valyrian blood, dragonlords of ancient lineage, 12 years before the doom of Valyria. 114 BC, Aegon Targaryen sold his holdings in the freehold of the lands of the Long Summer and moved with all his wives, wealth, slaves, dragons, siblings, kins and children to Dragonstone, a bleak island citadel beneath a smoking mountain in the narrow sea. At its prime, Valyria was the greatest city in the known world. The center of civilization within its shining walls. 2 rival houses vied for power and glory, rising and falling in an endless battle of savage struggle for dominance. The Targaryens were far from the most powerful of the Dragonlords, and their rivals saw their flight to Dragonstone as an act of surrender. Aegon's maiden daughter Denys, known forever afterward as Denys the Dreamer, had foreseen the destruction of Valyria by fire. And when the doom came 12 years later, the Targaryens were the only Dragonlords to survive. Dragonstone had been the westernmost outpost of Valyrian power for 2 centuries. Its location has been the stranglehold on Blackwater Bay, and enabled both the Targaryens and the close allies, the Valerians of Driftmark, a lesser house of Valyrian descent, fill their coffers off the passing trade. Valerian ships, along with those of another allied Valyrian house, the Celtigods of Claw Isle, dominated the middle reaches of the narrow sea, whilst the Targaryens ruled the skies with dragons. And even so, for the best part of 100 years after the doom of Valyria and the rightly named Century of Blood, House Targaryen looked east, not west, and took little interest in the affairs of Westeros. Aemon Targaryen, brother and husband to Denys the Dreamer, followed Aegon the Exile as Lord of Dragonstone and became known as Aemon the Glorious. Aemon's son, Aegon, and his daughter, Aelena, ruled together after his death. After them, the lordship passed to their son, Aegon, his brother, Aerys, and Aerys' son, Aenys, Balon, and Aemon, the last of the 3 brothers, Daemon, whose son, Arryn, then succeeded to Dragonstone. The Aegon, who would have known to history as Aegon the Conqueror and Aegon the Dragon, was born on Dragonstone in 27 BC. He was the only son and second child of Aegon Targaryen, Lord of Dragonstone, and Lady Velena of House Valerion, herself half Targaryen on her mother's side. Aegon had 2 trueborn siblings, an elder sister, Visenya, and a younger sister, Rhaenys. It has long been the custom amongst the Dragonlords of Valyria to wed brother to sister to keep the bloodlines pure. But Aegon took both his sisters to bride. By tradition, he would have been expected to wed only his older sister Visenya. The inclusion of Rhaenys as his second wife was unusual, though not without precedent. It was said by some that Aegon wed Visenya out of duty and Rhaenys out of desire. All three siblings had shown themselves to be dragon lords before they wed. Of the 5 dragons who had flown with Aena the Exile from Valyria, only one survived to Aegon's day. The great beast called Balerion the Black Dread. The dragons Vhagar and Meraxes were younger, hatched on Dragonstone itself. A common myth offered amongst the ignorant claims that Aegon Targaryen had never set foot upon the soil of Westeros until the day he set sail to conquer it. But this cannot be true. Years before that sailing, the painted table had been carved and decorated at Lord Aegon's command. A massive slab of wood, some 50 feet long, carved in the shape of Westeros and painted to show all the woods and rivers and towns and castles of the Seven Kingdoms. Plainly, Aegon's interest in Westeros long predated the events that drove him to war. There are reliable reports of Aegon and his sister, Visenya, visiting the citadel of Old Town in their youth and hawking on the harbor. As guests of Lord Redwyne. He may have visited Lannisport as well, accounts differ. In the books, Westeros of Aegon's youth was divided into 7 quarrelsome kingdoms, and there was hardly a time when 2 or 3 of these kingdoms were not at war with one another. The vast cold stony north was ruled by the Starks of Winterfell. In the deserts of Dorne, the Martell princes. The gold-rich Westlands were ruled by the Lannisters of Casterly Rock. The fertile Reach, by the Gardeners of Highgarden. The Vale, the Fingers, and the Mountains of the Moon belonged to House Arryn. To the most belligerent kings of Aegon's time, were 2 realms lay closest to Dragonstone, Harren the Black, and Argilac the Arrogant. From the great citadel Storm's End and the Storm Kings of House Durrandon had once ruled the eastern half of Westeros from Cape Wrath to the Bay of Crabs. But their powers had been dwindling for centuries. The kings of the Reach had nibbled the domains from the west. The Dornish men harassed them from the south, and Harren the Black and his Iron Men had pushed them from the Trident of the lands north of the Blackwater Rush. King Argilac, last of the Durrandon, had arrested this decline for a time, turning back a Dornish invasion, whilst still a boy crossing the narrow sea to join the Great Alliance against the imperialist Tigers of Volantis and slaying Gas the 7th Gardener, the King of the Reach, in the Battle of Summerfield 20 years later. But Argilac had grown older, his famous mane of black hair had gone grey and his powers at arms had faded, and also his hold on the Blackwater. The Riverlands were ruled by the bloody hand of Harren the Black, of House Hall, King of the Isles and the Rivers. Arryn's iron-born grandson, Harwin Hardened, had taken the trident from Argilac's grandson, Eric, whose own forebearers have thrown down the last of the River Kings centuries earlier. Arryn's father had extended his domains east to Duskendale and Rossby. Arryn himself had devoted most of his long reign of 40 years to building a gigantic castle, beside the God's Eye. But with Harrenhal at last nearing completion, the Ironborn would soon be free to seek fresh conquests. No king in Westeros was more feared than Black Harren, whose cruelty had become legendary all through the Seven Kingdoms. In Westeros, no one could threaten Argilac, the Storm King, last of the Durrandon. An aging warrior whose only heir was his maiden daughter. Because of that, King Argilac reached out to the Targaryens on Dragonstone, offering Lord Aegon his daughter in marriage with all the lands east of the God's Eye from the Trident to the Blackwater Rush as her dowry. Aegon Targaryen sparked the Storm King's proposal. He had 2 wives, he pointed out. He did not need a third, and the Tower lands being offered had belonged to Harrenhal for more than a generation. They were not Argilac's to give. Plainly, The aging Storm King meant to establish the Targaryens along the Blackwater as a buffer between his own lands and those of Arryn the Black. The Lord of Dragonstone countered with an offer of his own. He would take the Dorlands being offered if Argilac would also cede Massey's Hook and the woods and plains from the Blackwater south to the river Windwater and the headwaters of the Manda. The pacts would be sealed by the marriage of Argilac's daughter to his Baratheon lord, Aegon's childhood friend and champion, Orys Baratheon. These terms, Argilac the Arrogant rejected angrily. Orys Baratheon was a base-born half-brother to Lord Aegon. It was whispered, and the Storm King would not dishonor his daughter by giving her hand to a bastard, and that suggestion enraged him. So, he had the hands of Aegon's envoy cut off and returned to him in a box. "These are the only hands your bastard shall have of me," he wrote. Aegon made no reply. Instead, he summoned his friends, bannermen, and principal allies to attend him on Dragonstone. Their numbers were small. The Valerians of Driftmark were sworn to house Targaryen, as were the Celtigards of Claw Isle. From Massey's Hook came Lord Baemon of Sharp Point and Lord Massey of Stonedance, both sworn to Storm's End, but with closer ties to Dragonstone. Aegon and his sisters took counsel with them and visited the castle Sept to pray to the Seven of Westeros, though he had never before known to be a religious man. On the seventh day, a cloud of ravens burst from the towers of Dragonstone to bring Lord Aegon's word to the Seven Kingdoms of Westeros. To the Seven Kings they flew to the citadel of Old Town, to lords, both great and small, all carrying the same message. From this day, there would be but one king in Westeros. Those who bent the knee to Aegon of House Targaryen would keep their lands and titles. Those who took up arms against him would be thrown down, humbled and destroyed. Accounts differ on how many swords set sail from Dragonstone with Aegon and his sisters. Some say 3,000, others number them only in the hundreds. This modest Targaryen host put ashore the mouth of the Blackwater rush on a northern bank, where 3 wooded hills rose above a small fishing village in the days of the 100 Kingdoms. Many petty kings had claimed dominion over the river mouth. Amongst them, the Darkland Kings of Duskendale, the Masseys, the Stone Guards and the River Kings, the Fishers, Brackens, Blackwoods. All had climbed the 3 hills at various times, only to be thrown down in one war or another. Now, only broken stones and overgrown ruins remained to welcome the Targaryens. Though claimed by both Storm's End and Harrenhal, the river mouth was undefended, and the closest castles were held by lesser lords with no military powers. Moreover, the lords had little reason to love their nominal overlord, Arryn the Black. Aegon Targaryen quickly dispatched his sisters to secure the submission of the nearest castles. Roseby yielded to Rhaenys and Meraxes without a fight. At Stoquet, a few crossbows and loose boats were fired at Visenya until Vhagar's flames set the roofs of the castle ablaze. Then they too submitted to the conquerors. The first true test came from Lord Darkline of Duskendale and Lord Mutton of Maidenpool, who joined their power and marched south with 3,000 men to drive the invaders back into the sea. Aegon attacked them on the march whilst he descends on them from above with the Black Dread. Most lords were slain in the one-sided battle that followed. Darkland's son and Mutton's brother and thereafter yielded up their castles and sworn their swords to House Targaryen at that time. Duskendale was the principal Westerosi port on the narrow sea which had grown fat and wealthy from the trade that passed through its harbor. Visenya Targaryen did not allow the town to be sacked, but she did not hesitate to claim its riches, greatly swelling the coffers of the conquerors. This perhaps would be an apt place to discuss the differing characters of Aegon Targaryen and his sisters and queens. The eldest of the 3 siblings was as much a warrior as Aegon himself. She holds the Valyrian longsword, Dark Sister, and was skilled in its use. Having trained beside her brother since childhood, they possessed the silver gold hair and purple eyes of Valyria. Hers was a harsh, pure beauty. Even those who loved her best found her stern, serious, and unforgiving. Some also said she played with poisons and dabbled in dark sorcerers. Rhaenys, youngest of the three Targaryens, was all her sister was not. A playful, curious, impulsive, given to flights of fantasy. No true warrior, Rhaenys loved music, dancing, and poetry and supported many. A singer, yet, it was said that Rhaenys spent more time on Dragonback than her brother and sister combined. For above all things that she loved to fly, she was once heard saying that before she died, she meant to fly Meraxes across the sunset sea to see what lay upon its western shores. Whilst no one ever questioned the same fidelity to her brother and husband, Rhaenys surrounded herself with comely young men, and it was whispered she even entertained some in her bedchambers on the nights when Aegon was with her elder sister. Yet, despite these rumors, observers at court could not fail to note that the king spent 10 nights with Rhaenys for every night with Visenya. Aegon Targaryen himself strangely was as much an enigma to his contemporaries. Armed with the Valyrian steel blade Blackfire, he was counted amongst the greatest warriors of his age, yet he took no pleasure in fists of arms and never rode in tourneys. His mount was Balerion the Black Dread, but he flew only to battle or to travel swiftly across land and sea. His commanding presence drew men to his banners. Yet, he had no close friends except Orys Baratheon, the companion of his youth. Women were drawn to him, but Aegon remained ever faithful to his sisters. As king, he put great trust in his small council and his sisters, leaving much of the day-to-day governance of the realm to them. Yet did not hesitate to take command when he found it necessary. Although he dealt harshly with rebels and traitors, he was open-handed with former foes who bent the knee. He commanded the lords he had defeated to attend him, and they laid their swords at his feet. And Aegon raised them up and confirmed them in their lands and titles, and also to his oldest supporters. He gave new honors to Daemon Valerion, Lord of the Tides, and Master of Ships in command of the royal fleet. Crystal Massey, Lord of Stone Dance, was named Master of Laws. Crispy Celtigerd, Master of Coin, and Orys Baratheon. He proclaimed to be my shield, my stalwart, my strong right hand, the first king's hand. Peridig banners had long been a tradition amongst the lords of Westeros, but such had never been used by the Dragonlords of old Valyria. When Aegon's knights unfurled his great silken battle standard with a red, three-headed dragon breathing fire upon a black field, the lords took it for a sign that he was now truly one of them, a worthy high king of Westeros. When Queen Visenya placed the Valyrian steel circlet studded with rubies on her brother's head, and Queen Rhaenys hailed him as Aegon, first of his name, king of all Westeros and shield of his people, the dragons roared, and the lords and knights cheered. But the small folks, the fishermen and field hands and good wives shouted loudest. Of all the 7 kings that Aegon the dragon meant to uncrown, none was cheering. However, in Harrenhal and Storm's End, Arryn the Black and Argilac the Arrogant had already called the banners. In the west, King Man of the Reach rode north to Casterly Rock to meet with King Loren of House Lannister. The Princess of Dorne dispatched a raven to Dragonstone, offering to join Aegon against Argilac and the Storm King, but as an equal ally, not a subject. Another offer of alliance came from the young king of the Eyrie, Ronal Arryn, whose mother asked for the lands east of the Green Fork of the Trident for the Vale's support against Black Arryn. Even in the north, King Torren Stark of Winterfell sat with his lords and bannermen and councillors late into the night, discussing what was to be done about this would-be conqueror. The whole realm waited anxiously to see where Aegon would move next within days of his coronation. Aegon's armies were on the march again. The greater part of his host crossed the Blackwater Rush, heading south to the Storm's End under the command of Orys Baratheon. Accompanied him, astride monarchies of the Golden Eyes and Silver Scales. The Targaryen fleet under Demon Valerion left Blackwater Bay and turned north for Gold Town and the Vale. They went with Queen Visenya and Vhagar. The king himself marched northwest to the God's Eye and Harrenhal, the magnificent fortress that was the pride and obsession of King Arryn the Black. All three of the Targaryen trusts faced fierce opposition. Lords Errol Fell and Buckler, Bannerman to Storm's End surprised the advance elements of Orys Baratheon's host as they were crossing the Windwater, cutting down more than 1,000 men before fleeing back into the trees. Hastily assembled Iron Fleet, augmented by a dozen braver sea warships, met and defeated the Targaryen fleet in the waters of Gull Town. Amongst the dead was Aegon's admiral, Demon Valerion. Aegon himself was attacked on the south shore of God's Eye, not once, but twice. The Battle of the Reeds was a Targaryen victory, but they suffered heavy losses off the Wailing Willows. Two of King Arryn's sons crossed the lake in longboats with muffled oars and fell upon their rear. In the end, though, Aegon's enemies had no answer for his dragons. The Vale army sank a third of the Targaryen ships, and captured near as many. But when Queen Visenya descended upon them from the sky, their own ships burned, Lord Errol Fell and Buckler hid in their familiar forests until Queen Rhaenys unleashed Meraxes and a wall of fire swept through the woods, turning the trees to torch. Pirates from the Stepstones descended on the shores of Cape Wrath to take advantage of their absence, and Dornish raiding parties came boiling out of the Red Mountains to sweep across the marches. In the Vale, young King Ronald Arryn had to contain the rebellion of the Three Sisters. When the sisters' men renounced all allegiance to the Eyrie and proclaimed Lady Marla Sunderland their queen. These were the minor vexations compared to what Arryn the Black had ruled the Riverlands for 3 generations. The men of the Trident had no love for their overlords. Arryn the Black had driven thousands to their deaths in the building of his great castle of Harrenhal, plundering the Riverlands for materials and burdening lords and small folks alike with his appetite for gold. Now, the Riverlands rose against him, led by Lord Edmile Tarly of Riverrun. To the defense of Edmile Tarly, he declared for House Targaryen instead, and raised the dragon banner over his castle and rode with his knights and archers to join his strengths to Aegon's. His defiance gave heart to the other riverlords. One by one the lords of the Trident renounced Arryn and declared for Aegon. The Blackwoods, Malisters, Vances, Krakens, Pipers, Freys, Strongs, all summoning their levers and descended on Harrenhal. Suddenly outnumbered, King Arryn the Black took refuge in his supposedly impregnable stronghold castle, the largest castle ever raised in Westeros. Harrenhal boasted 5 gargantuan towers, an inexhaustible source of fresh water, huge subterranean vaults, well stocked with provisions, and massive walls of black stone higher than any ladder and too thick to be broken by any ram or shattered by a trebuchet. Arryn barred his gates and settled down with his remaining sons and supporters to withstand the siege. But Aegon Targaryen of Dragonstone was of a different mind. Once he joined his power with that of Edmile Tarly and the other river lords to ring the castle. He sent a maester to the gates under a peace banner to parley. Each king had his banner and his maester in attendance, so the words that they exchanged are still remembered. "Yield now," Aegon began, "and you may remain as Lord of the Iron Islands. Yield now, and your sons will live to rule after you. I have 8,000 men outside your walls. What is outside my walls is of no concern to me," said Arryn. "Those walls are strong and thick, but not so high as to keep our dragons fly." "I built in stone," said Arryn. "Stone does not burn." To which Aegon said, "When the sun sets, your line shall end." They said that Arryn spat at that and returned to his castle. Once inside, he sent every man of his to the walls, armed with spears and bows and crossbows, promising lands and riches to whichever of them could bring the dragon down, and not his daughter though to the dragon slayer. Arryn the Black proclaimed, "Instead, I will give him one of Tarly's daughters, or all three of them if he likes, or he may pick one of Blackwood's. Well, or any girl born of these traitors of the Trident, these lords of Yellowmud." And Arryn the Black retired to his tower, surrounded by his household guards to support his remaining sons. As the last light of the sun faded, Black Arryn's men stared into the gathering darkness, clutching their spears and crossbows. No dragon appeared. Some may have thought that Aegon's threats had been hollow. Aegon Targaryen took Balerion up high through the clouds, up and up until the dragon was no bigger than a fly upon the moon. Only then did he descend well inside the castle walls, the wings as black as pitch. Balerion plunged through the night, and when the great towers of Harrenhal appeared beneath him, the dragon roared his fury and bathed them in black fire. Stone does not burn, Arryn had boasted, but his castle was not made of stone alone. Wood and wool, hemp, and straw, bread and salted beef and grain all took fire. The ironmen saw the smoke, screaming, shrouded in flames. They ran across the yard and tumbled from the walls, falling to die upon the ground below. Even stone will crack and melt if a fire is hot enough. The lords outside the castle walls said later that the towers of Harrenhal glowed red against the night, like 5 great candles. They began to twist and melt as runnels of molten stone ran down their sides. Arryn and his last sons died in the fires that engulfed his monstrous fortress. That night, House Or died with him, and so too did the Iron Islands hold on the Riverlands. The next day, outside the smoking ruins of Harrenhal, King Aegon accepted oath of fealty from Edmile Tarly, Lord of Riverrun, and named him Lord Paramount of the Trident. The other Riverlords did homage as well to Aegon as king, and to Edmile Tarly as their liege lord. When the ashes had cooled enough to allow men to enter the castle safely, the swords of the fallen, many shattered or melted or twisted into ribbons of steel by dragonfire, were gathered up and sent back to the Aegon fort in wagons. In the east, the Storm King's bannermen proved considerably more loyal than King Arryn's. Argilac the Arrogant gathered a great host around him at Storm's End. The seat of the Durrandons was a mighty fortress, its great curtain wall ever thicker than the walls of Harrenhal. It too was thought to be impregnable to assault. News of King Arryn soon reached the ears of his old enemy, King Argilac. The old warrior king ruled that he did not intend to die like Arryn had inside his own castle. Like a suckling pig with an apple in his mouth. He's no stranger to battle. He would decide his own fate with a sword in his hand. So, Argilac the Arrogant rode forth from Storm's End one last time to meet his foes in the open field. Storm King's approach was no surprise to Orys Baratheon and his men. Queen Rhaenys, while flying Meraxes, had witnessed Argilac's departure from Storm's End and was able to give the hand a full accounting of the enemy's numbers and dispositions. Orys took up a strong position on the hills south of Bronze Gauge and dug in on the high ground to await the coming of the Stormlanders. As the armies came together, the Stormlanders proved true to their name. A steady rain began to fall that morning, and by midday, it had turned into a violent storm. Lord Argilac's bannermen urged him to delay his attack until the next day in hopes the rain would pass. But the Storm King outnumbered the conquerors almost 2 to 1 and had almost 5 times as many knights and heavy horses. The sight of the Targaryen banners flapping above his own hills enraged him, and the battle-seasoned old warrior did not fail to note that the rain was blowing from the south into the faces of the Targaryen men on their hills. So, Argilac the Arrogant gave the command to attack to commence the battle known to history as the Last Storm. The fighting lasted well into the night, a bloody business, and far less one-sided than Aegon's conquest of Harrenhal. Argilac the Arrogant laid his knights against the Baratheon positions, but the slips were steep and the rains had turned the ground soft and muddy. So, the warring horses struggled and foundered, and the chargers lost all cohesion and momentum. The Stormlanders fare better when they send their spearmen up the hills on foot, blinded by the rain. The invaders did not see them climbing until it was too late. One hill fell and then another, and the fourth and final charge of the Storm King and his knight broke through the Baratheon center, only to come upon Queen Rhaenys and Meraxes. Even on the ground, the dragon proved formidable. Deacon Morgan and the bastard Blackhaven commanding the vanguard were engulfed in dragonflame, along with the knights of King Argilac's personal guard. The war horses panicked and fled in terror, crashing into the ground and turning the charge into chaos. The Storm King himself was thrown from his saddle, yet still Argilac continued to battle when Orys Baratheon came down the muddy hill with his own men. He found the old king, holding off half a dozen men with as many corpses at his feet. He dismounted so as to meet the king on equal footing, and offered the Storm King one last chance to yield. Argilac cursed him instead. And so therefore, the old warring king with his streaming white hair and Aegon's fierce black-bearded hand, each man took a wound from the other. It was said that in the end, the last of the Dorne got his wish and died with a sword in his hand and a curse on his lips. The death of their king took all heart out of the Stormlanders, and as the word spread that Argilac had fallen, his lords and knights threw down their swords and fled for a few days. It was feared that Storm's End might suffer the same fate as Harrenhal. For Argilac's daughter, Lady Argilla barred her gates of the approach of Orys Baratheon and the Targaryen host and declared herself the Storm Queen rather than bend the knee. The defenders of Storm's End would die to the last man she promised. When Queen Rhaenys flew Meraxes into the castle to parley, "You may take my castle, but you will win only bones and blood and ashes," she announced. Though the soldiers of the garrison proved less eager to die that night, they raised a peace banner, and opened the castle gate and delivered Lady Argilla, gagged, chained and naked, to the camp of Orys Baratheon. It is said that Orys Baratheon unchained her with his own hands, wrapped his cloak around her, poured her wine and spoke to her gently, telling her of her father's courage and the manner of his death. And afterward, to honor the fallen king, he took the arms and words of the Dorne for his own. The crown stack became his sigil. Storm's End became his seat, and Lady Argilla, his wife. With both the Riverlands and Stormlands now under the control of Aegon the Dragon and his allies, the remaining kings of Westeros saw plainly that their own terms were coming. At Winterfell, King Torren Stark called his banners, given the vast distances in the north. He knew that assembling an army would take time. Queen Shara of the Vale reaches for her son, Ronald, and took refuge in the Eyrie. She looked at her defenses and sent an army to the Bloody Gate, gateway to the Vale. In her youth, Queen Shara had been lauded as the flower of the mountain, the fairest maid in all the Seven Kingdoms. Perhaps hoping to sway Aegon with her beauty, she sent him a portrait and offered herself to him in marriage, provided he named her son Ronald as his heir. The portrait finally reached Aegon, but it is not known whether Aegon Targaryen ever replied to her proposal. He had 2 queens already, and Shara Arryn was, by then, a faded flower 10 years older. Meanwhile, the 2 great Western kings have made common cause and assembled their own armies with the intent on putting an end to Aegon for good. From Highgarden, marched on the 9th of House Gardener, King of the Reach. He met Loren, the first Lannister, King of the Rock, leading his own host down from the Westlands. Together, The two kings commanded the mightiest host ever seen in Westeros, an army 55,000 strong, including some 600 lords, great and small, and more than 5,000 mounted knights. His iron fist boasted King Man. His poor sons rode beside him, and both of his young grandsons attended him as squires. The two kings did not linger along at Golden Grove. The host of such size must remain on the march. The allies set out at once, marching north by northeast through tall grasses and golden fields of wheat. On the advice of their coming towards the God's Eye, Aegon gathered his own strengths and advanced to meet these new foes. He commanded only a fifth, as many men as the two kings, and much of his strength made up of men sworn to the River Lords, whose loyalty to House Targaryen was of recent vintage and untested with a smaller host. However, Aegon was able to move much more quickly than his foes. At the town of Stony Sept, both his queens joined him with the dragons. Rhaenys from Storm's End and Visenya from Crack Floor Point, where she had accepted many fervent pledges of fealty from the local lords together. The three Targaryens watched from the sky as Aegon's army crossed the headwaters of the Blackwater rush and raced south. The two armies came together amongst the wide open plains south of Blackwater, near where the Gold Road would run one day. The two kings rejoiced when their scouts returned and reported the Targaryen numbers and dispositions. They had 5 men for every one of Aegon's, it seemed, and the disparity in lords and knights were even greater. The land was wide with open grass and wheat, as far as the eye could see, ideal for heavy horses. Aegon Targaryen would not command the high ground as Orys Baratheon had done at the last storm. The ground was firm, not muddy, nor would they be troubled by rain. Today was cloudless, though windy. There had been no rain for more than a fortnight. King Man had brought half gain as many men to the battle as King Lauren and demanded the honor of commanding the center. King Lauren and his knights would form the circle. With no natural barriers to anchor the Targaryen line, the two kings meant to sweep around Aegon on both flanks, then take them down. With spears and swords, with archers and crossbowmen behind and light cavalry on either flank. Aegon Targaryen gave command of his host to Jon Mutin, Lord of Maidenpool, one of the first foes to come over to his cause. The Gardeners and Lannisters charged through a storm of arrows down unto their foes, sweeping aside the Targaryen spearmen and shattering their ranks. But by then, Aegon and his sisters were in the air. Aegon went through the ranks of his foes upon Balerion through a storm of spears and stones and arrows, swooping down repeatedly to burn his foes in flames. Rhaenys and Visenya set fires upwind of the enemy, and behind them, the dry grass stems of wheat went up at once. The wind fanned the flames and blew the smoke into the faces of the advancing ranks of the two kings. The scent of fire sent their mouths into panic, and as the smoke thickened, horse and riders alike were blinded. Their ranks began to break. Lord Lauren's men started to burn, and the burning men came down at once, staggering from the infernal. The Field of Fire, the battle was named afterward. More than 4,000 men died in the flames, another 1,000 perished by sword and spear and arrows. Tens of thousands suffered burns, some so bad that they would remain scarred for life. Gardner IV was amongst the dead, together with his sons, grandsons, brothers, cousins, and other kins. One nephew survived for 3 days. When he died of his burns, House Gardner died with him. King Lauren of the Rock lived, riding through a wall of flames and smoke to safety, when he saw the battle is lost. The Targaryens lost fewer than 100 men. Queen Visenya took an arrow in one shoulder, but soon recovered. As the dragons gorged themselves on the dead, Aegon commanded that the swords of the slain be gathered up and sent down river. Lauren Lannister was captured the next day. The King of the Rock laid his sword and crown to Aegon's feet. bent the knee and did him homage, and Aegon, true to his promises, lifted his beaten foe back to his feet, and confirmed him in his lands and lordship, naming him Lord of Casterly Rock and Warden of the West. Lord Luton's bannermen followed his example, and so did many lords of the Reach, those who had survived the dragon fire. But the conquest of the West remained incomplete, so King Aegon parted from his sisters and marched at once to Highgarden, hoping to secure its surrender before some other claimant could seize it for his own. He found the castle in the hands of its steward, Harlan Tyrell, who his forebears had served the gardeners for centuries. Tyrell yielded up the keys to the castle without a fight and pledged his support to the conquering king. In reward, Aegon granted him Highgarden and all its domains, naming him Warden of the South and Lord Paramount of the Mander, and giving him dominion over all House Gardeners' former vassals. It was King Aegon's intent to continue his march south and enforce the submission of Old Town, the Arbor and Dorne. And whilst at Highgarden, word of a new challenge came to his ears. Torren Stark, king in the north, had crossed the neck and entered the Riverlands, leading an army of savage Northmen 30,000 strong. Aegon at once headed north to meet him, racing ahead of his army on the wings of Balerion the Black Dread. He sent word to his two queens as well, and to all the lords and knights who had bent the knee to him after Harrenhal and the Field of Fire. When Torren Stark reached the banks of the Trident, he found a host half the size of his own awaiting him south of the river. Riverlords, Westmen, Stormlanders, men of the Reach, all had come. And above their camp, Valerian, Meraxes and Vhagar ploughing the sky and ever-whitening circles. Torren's scouts had seen the ruins of Harrenhal, where slow red fires still burned beneath the rubble. The king in the north had heard many accounts of Field of Fire as well. He knew that the same fate might await him if he tried to force a crossing of the river. Some of his lords and bannermen urged him to attack all the same, insisting that the northern solidity would carry the day. Others urged him to fall back to Moth Cailin and make his stand there on northern soil. The king's bastard brother, Brandon Snow, offered to cross the Trident alone under cover of darkness to slay the dragons. King Torren did send Brandon Snow across the Trident, but he crossed with 3 maesters by his side, not to kill, but to treat. All through the night messages went back and forth, and the next morning, Torren Stark himself crossed the Trident, and ended up on the south bank of the Trident. He knelt, laid the ancient crown of the kings of winter at Aegon's feet, and swore to be his man. He rose as Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, a king no more from that day to this day. Torren Stark is remembered as the king who knelt. The swords Aegon collected from Lord Stark and his vassals were not twisted nor melted nor bent. Now Aegon Targaryen and his queen's party company again. Aegon turned south once again, marching toward Old Town, whilst his 2 sisters mounted the dragons, Visenya for the Vale of Arryn and Rhaenys to Sunspear and the deserts of Dorne. Shara Arryn had strengthened the defenses of Ghoultown, moved a strong host to the Bloody Gate, and tripled the size of the garrisons in stone, snow, and sky, the way castles had guarded the approach to the Eyrie. All these defenses proved useless against Visenya Targaryen, who rode Vhagar's heavy wings above them all and landed in the courtyard. When the legends of the Vale rushed to confront her with a dozen guards at her back, they found Visenya with Ronal Arryn, seated on her lap, staring at the dragon. Wonder struck, "Mother, can I go flying with the lady?" the boy king asked. No threats were spoken. No angry words exchanged. The 2 queens smiled at one another and exchanged pleasantries instead, and Lady Shara sent for the 3 crowns, her own, her son's small crown, and the falcon crown of the Mountain of Vale, of which the Arryn kings had worn for thousands of years, and surrendered them to Queen Visenya. Along with the swords of her garrison, and it was said afterward that the little king flew thrice above the summit of the giant's lance and landed to find himself a little lord. Rhaenys Targaryen had no such easy conquest. A host of Dornish spearmen guarded the princes on the gateway through the Red Mountains, but Rhaenys did not engage them. She flew above the pass of the Red Sands and the White and descended upon Faith to demand its submission, only to find the castle empty and abandoned. In the town beneath its walls, only women and children and old men remained. When asked where their lords had gone, they would only say, "Away." Rhaenys followed the river downstream to God's grace seat of House Balerion, but it too was deserted. Where the green blood met the sea, Rhaenys came upon a clanky town, where ropes and chains and planks had been used to make a floating city, yet only a few old women and small children appeared to peer up at her as Meraxes circled overhead. Finally, the Queen's flight took out to Sunspear, the ancient seat of House Martell, which she found the Princess of Dorne waiting in her abandoned castle. Maria Martell was 80 years of age. The maesters tell lessons that she had ruled the Dornish men for 60 of those years. She was very fat, blind, and almost bald. Her skin sallow and sagging. Argilac the Arrogant had named her the Yellow Toad of Dorne. Neither age nor blindness adult her wins. "I will not fight you," Princess Maria told Rhaenys, "nor will I kneel to you. Dorne has no king. Tell your brother that." Rhaenys replied, "I shall, but we will come again, princess. And this time we shall come with fire and blood." "Your words," said Princess Maria. "Ours are unbored, unbent, unbroken. You may burn us, my lady, but you will not end us, break us, or make us bore. This is Dorne, you are not wanted here. You may return at your peril." Thus, the Queen and Princess parted and Dorne remained unconquered. To the west, Aegon Targaryen met a warmer welcome. The greatest city in all of Westeros, Old Town was ringed about with massive walls and ruled by the high towers of the Old Town. The oldest, richest and most powerful of the noble houses of the Reach. Old Town was also the center of the faith. There is the home of the High Septon, father of the faith, the voice of the new God on earth, who commanded the obedience of millions of devout throughout the realms, except the north where the old gods are still worshipped. When Aegon Targaryen and his host approached Old Town, they found the city gates opened and Lord Hightower waiting to make his submission. As it happened when word of Aegon's landing first reached Old Town, the High Septon had locked himself within the starry sept for 7 days and 7 nights seeking the guidance of the gods. He took no nourishment, but bread and water and spent all his waking hours in prayer, moving from one altar to the next. And on the 7th day, the crown had lifted up her golden lamp to show him the path ahead in Old Town. Anyone who take up arms against Aegon the Dragon, His High Holiness saw the city would surely burn and the citadel and the starry sept would be cast down and destroyed. The lord of the Old Town was a cautious lord and godly. One of his younger sons served with the warriors' sons, and another had only recently taken vows as a septim. When the High Septon told him the vision about him and the crown, Lord Hightower determined that he would not oppose the conqueror by force of arms. So, no man from Old Town burned like the field of fire. Though the high towers were bannermen to the gardeners of Highgarden, and it was said, Lord Manfred rode forth to greet Aegon the Dragon as he approached and to offer him his sword, his city, and his land. Some say that Lord Manfred also offered up the hands of his youngest daughter, which Aegon declined politely, unless he intended to offend his 2 queens. 3 days later in the starry sept, His High Holiness himself anointed Aegon with the 7 oils, placed a crown upon his head and proclaimed him Aegon of House Targaryen, the first of his name, King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the first men. Lord of the 7 kingdoms and protector of the realm. 7 kingdoms, was the style used, though Dorne had not submitted, nor won it for more than a century to come. Only a handful of lords have been present for Aegon's first coronation of the mouth of the Blackwater. But hundreds were at hand to witness his second, and tens of thousands cheer him afterward in the streets of Old Town as he rode through the city on Balerion's back. Amongst those of Aegon's second coronation were the maesters and archmaesters of the citadel. Many thought that King Aegon would make Old Town his royal seat after the wars were done, whilst others thought he would rule from Dragonstone, the ancient island citadel of House Targaryen. The king surprised them all, by proclaiming his intent to make his court in the new town already rising upon the 3 hills of the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, where he and his sisters had first set foot on the soil of Westeros, King's Landing, the new town would be called. From there, Aegon the Dragon would rule his realm, holding court from a great metal seat made from the melted, twisted, beaten, and broken blades of all his fallen foes. A formidable seat that would soon be known throughout the world as the Iron Throne of Westeros. Kindly like and subscribe to watch the next episode, The Dornish War.